Okay, thank you to the organizers for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here. It's always good to see friends and familiar faces at Dystonia Europe. Now, having listened to some of the Dystonia stories by Adam, by Erhard, by Amy Bell, by Christina, I sort of feel a bit like an imposter, and I feel as if I should really be listening to you as experts on what it's like to cope and live with dystonia. I only know about living well with dystonia based on the research that I've done on people like yourselves. And as someone who doesn't have dystonia, I don't have first-hand experience of it. What I'm going to tell you, I've tried to make relatively accessible. I'm not going to give you any facts or figures. I'm going to try to present my talk in relatively simple language. I'm going to focus on self-management in dystonia. I usually talk about quality of life, but I don't have time in the 20 minutes allocated. So I'm going to really focus on what you can do to live well with dystonia. And as I said, although I'm not going to present any facts or figures, everything that I'm going to say is based on empirical research. There's evidence backing up the fact that these techniques, these procedures, these strategies that you can use really work. So, living with dystonia. From research, we know that there are individual differences between people in terms of the psychological and the social impact of dystonia. And you probably have noticed this from your interactions with each other. Some people, despite having relatively severe dystonia, seem to experience little impact on their daily activities and their social participation. They carry on with their lives normally. Other people, by contrast, seem to have mild dystonia, but experience reduction in their daily activities and in their social participation. So these individual differences tell us that the severity of the illness, the severity of the dystonia, is not the only important factor. Other important factors are the personal characteristics of an individual who's got the illness, and the social resources that are available to them, and the social environment that they live in are also important factors in determining how people live and cope with dystonia. And the fact that these other factors are important means that there are things that you can do to live better with dystonia. So much of medicine, if you look at the figure on the left, much of medicine is dominated by this medical model of health. Doctors are seen as rescuers that rescue patients from their illness. In the self-management model on the right, the story is different. Patients manage their illness with the aid or with the help of doctors. And my talk is really within this self-management perspective. Things that people can do to help themselves live better. And Adam, in 2004, defined what we mean by this self-management in chronic illness, and he defined it as relating to the tasks that an individual must undertake to live well with a chronic illness. And these tasks include gaining confidence, not only to deal with medical management, the treatment options that are available, but also with role management, your role as an employee, your role as a wife, your role as a husband, your role as a parent, and managing emotional management. Managing your feelings and your thoughts about living with the illness. So these are all the things that come under the umbrella of self-management. Now, these are, for the lack of a better term, I've called them my 23 commandments. If you've heard me speak before, the number of commandments are going up on a regular basis. These are strategies that within a self-management perspective, I think people can use to live better with dystonia. And I will try to go through each one of them in turn. So the first thing is to obtain information about dystonia and its medical treatment. There are individual differences between people in terms of how much they want to know. Some people want to have as much information as possible. Others want to know as little as possible because it makes them feel anxious. But in general, people say information is power. Information is good for two reasons. One, because it gives you a sense of control. And within the context of a chronic illness like dystonia, having an element of control is a good thing and makes you feel better. The second reason is that information allows you to make informed choices, and that is, can only be a good thing. The second thing is to become an active partner in managing your dystonia. So it's important not to allocate all the responsibility for your health and your well-being to the doctors. Participate in this process. Obtain information about all available sources of treatment and get involved in that decision-making process. Use adaptive ways of coping. Most of us, when we're challenged with any form of stressful event, we try out different strategies, and some strategies are maladaptive because they reduce your adjustment to your situation. And maladaptive ways of coping are things like excessive drinking, overeating, wishful thinking, running away from your problems, worrying. These are all maladaptive strategies because they don't help you come to terms with your illness better. Adaptive ways of coping, on the other hand, improve your adjustment to the illness. Things like using alternative strategies to achieve your goals. So, for example, somebody with writer's cramp, instead of writing, using typing instead. Allowing yourself more time to achieve tasks. So somebody with blepharospasm, for example, if reading, they can't expect themselves to read in the same usual amount of time, allowing more time. Being flexible and trying to change your routines to allow for the limitations imposed by your dystonia. Trying to achieve a balance between being active but not pushing yourself so hard that you are fatigued, and making allowances for limitations imposed by the dystonia. So using adaptive ways of coping. Maintaining your self-esteem and developing your sense of identity. In this regard, remembering that you are not your dystonia. Don't let your identity collapse down to dystonia. There's more to you as a person than just your dystonia. Dystonia hasn't deprived you of all the good personal characteristics that you have. Dystonia hasn't robbed you of your sense of humor. Dystonia hasn't robbed you of your kindness. Let these develop these personal characteristics and let them shine through in your daily interactions with other people. Increase your sense of control and know what to control. As I said, it's, in the context of challenges of a chronic illness, having a sense of control is good. But it's important to know what to control. You can't change the fact that you've got dystonia. That's outside your control. What you can control is how you decide to live with it, how you choose to live with it. You can control your thoughts, you can control your feelings, you can control what you do, you can control who you interact with. These are things that are within your control. The fact of the dystonia, the challenge, the fact that you've got dystonia is something that's outside your control. And this is the essence of the serenity prayer. God grant me this serenity to accept the things that I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And the things that you cannot change, one way of dealing with it would be to accept and come to terms with it, instead of trying to control it and trying to change it. Maintain a positive outlook and keep hope alive. Now, in trying to maintaining a positive outlook, the best strategy is to engage in positive self-talk. Catch yourself thinking negative thoughts. Challenge these negative thoughts. Remember that these are just thoughts. Thoughts are just personal statements that we make to ourselves. They're not facts. They're not valid. Don't let these negative thoughts dictate your behavior and what you do. Keep hope alive. As we discussed on Thursday, there has been progress in treatment of dystonia, even within the 35 years that I've been associated with the illness. Botulinum toxin injections came on the scene shortly after I started my PhD. In the past 25 years, we've had deep brain stimulation, which is an effective treatment. So there is hope that within the next 5-10 years, there may be a better treatment and even a cure. Who knows? But important to live in hope. Live mindfully. Most of us tend to, at times, live on automatic pilot. On a daily basis, a large proportion of our behaviors are habitual and automatic behaviors rather than goal-directed and mindful behaviors. And mindfulness is just basically means paying attention in the present moment without judgment. So, for example, if I wanted to do a session of mindfulness training with you all now, which I could do, taking the example of Jean-Pierre, I would ask you to close your eyes, concentrate on your breathing, and just pay attention to your breathing. And when you notice your mind wandering, just bring your attention back to your breathing, and that's being mindful. That's being present in the moment, stopping worrying about what has gone in the past or what may happen to the future, because the only real thing is really the present moment, the moment that we're living in. And there's evidence suggesting that 8 sessions of mindfulness training makes people feel happier in their lives. And there's a lot of training out there, so that's perhaps something that you may want to try out. Now, be grateful for positive aspects of your life. No matter how bad we think life is, there's always someone somewhere worse off than us. Any one of us could be the migrants who flee wars in Syria, Libya, or Afghanistan and get on those dangerous boats to cross the Mediterranean to get to Europe. We could be the people who were bombed on last night in Syria. So there are always people who are worse off than us. It's important to be grateful for the positive aspects that are there in all our lives. Be grateful for all the parts of your body that work, your eyes, your ears, your lung, your heart, your legs. Be grateful for your friends, your family. Every day may not be good, but if you really think hard, there's something good in every day. And a useful exercise to develop this mindset of gratefulness is to, last thing in bed, when you're just lying there, try to think to yourself of 3 things that you're grateful for that day. 1, 2, 3. Jot them down. Make that a habit. It's a good habit to be grateful for things, positive things in your life. Build up resilience. Resilience is the ability to bounce back after adversity. Most of us come across obstacles. Most of us try to achieve goals and make mistakes and fail. Resilience refers to the fact that we bounce back from these adversity, try again, and try again and try again until we succeed. And this is the essence of the statement by Samuel Beckett, the Irish playwright, that says, ever tried, ever failed, no matter. Try again, fail better. This is the essence of resilience. not giving up, sticking to it until you achieve your goals. Setting goals and aiming to achieve them. There's evidence suggesting that all of us are happier when we have a purpose in life, when we have a goal. So it's important to set goals and try to achieve them, but vaguely saying I will try to keep active won't be helpful. It's important to set goals that are smart, goals that are specific, that are measurable, that are attainable, that are relevant, and they're time-bound. They don't have to be complex things. You could say to yourself, my goal today is to deal with all the backlog of my emails. My goal today is to paint the wall in the kitchen. And once you've achieved that goal, give yourself a pat on the back and a chocolate biscuit, and set another goal and move on, a smart goal. Develop self-compassion. Self-compassion is giving ourselves the same kindness and care that we would give to a good friend. It's important to turn off that self-critical voice in our heads, reminding ourselves you're doing your best, you're trying to cope with an illness that can sometimes impose limitations and can be difficult. So give yourself that self-compassion that you would give to a friend. Be kinder to yourself. And there's evidence suggesting that people who are exercise self-compassion, that they are kinder to themselves, tend to be happier, they tend to be less stressed, and they tend to be more resilient, and they don't give up when they come up against obstacles. So self-compassion. Engage in daily random acts of kindness. When was the last time you did a kind act for somebody else? An act purely for the benefit of someone else. It doesn't have to be anything elaborate. Just making a cup of tea for a colleague, giving a partner a hug, ringing someone you haven't been in touch with for a while. These daily random acts of kindness are free, doesn't cost you anything, but it's priceless for the recipient. And there's evidence suggesting that these acts of kindness not only makes the recipient of the kind act happy, but also the person who is being kind. It gives them pleasure and happiness. So these daily random acts of kindness are absolutely free. Remind yourself, engage in them. Now, seek treatment for depression and anxiety. We know two things about anxiety and depression in relation to dystonia from the research that I have done and other people have done. First, that depression and anxiety are common in dystonia. Something between 30 to 40% of people with dystonia will experience clinical depression or anxiety sometime in the course of the illness. The second thing that we know from research is that depression and anxiety have a negative impact on the quality of life of people with dystonia. So it's important that depression and anxiety are treated. And there are times in the course of dystonia where depression and anxiety are most likely. In the initial phases of the illness, immediately after diagnosis, when people's aspirations have to be modified as a result of the illness perhaps, times when people have to give up something that affects their independence, for example, when people have to give up driving, or when an effective treatment, for example, stops working. Maybe times when people are more prone to develop depression and anxiety. The important thing is that you shouldn't suffer in silence. You need to tell your GP or your neurologist that you are feeling a bit low, that you're depressed, or that you're feeling anxious. And this is important because there is evidence suggesting that neurologists don't always inquire about mood during a neurological session. But remember that communication with doctors is a two-way process. It's your responsibility to tell the doctors that you need help with depression and anxiety. Don't suffer in silence. They are treatable conditions and they can be easily treated. Try to overcome physical and mental obstacles to independence. Because of the time that it can take to to achieve some goals, the time and energy that it may take with dystonia, there may come a time where there may be a tendency for you to say, oh, I cannot do that anymore, or that will exhaust me. When situations like that occur, ask yourself, is this true? Is there some way, some creative way that I can overcome these obstacles and go there and do that? Plan what you're going to do, pace yourself, have frequent periods of rest, and achieve things that you're interested in doing but you think are not easily achievable. Now, dystonia doesn't affect the pleasure centers of your brain, your reward centers of the brain. So it's important to remember to schedule for fun and pleasure. And again, because of the time and effort that it may take to do things because of the dystonia, there's a tendency for people to cut down on their leisure activities, and this is not a good idea. It's important to schedule for fun and pleasure and to make it a priority, because it re-energizes you to face another day. And this could be just listening to music, going to the movies, getting together with friends. Now, there's evidence suggesting that social support in the context of chronic illness acts as a sort of a buffer, if you like, a protective layer against the challenges and layers of a chronic illness. And it's important that you maintain and you enhance your social support network. People in your environment, your family, your friends, or your colleagues, to whom you can turn for sympathy, for emotional ventilation, for practical support. Important to not let embarrassment cut out your social support network. Friendships have to be nurtured. You have to make an effort to keep in touch with people and keep your social support network alive. Engaging frequent communication with the family. Dystonia doesn't just affect the person who's got the illness. It affects the whole family. There may have to be changes within the family in terms of who goes out to work, who does the housework, and these changes or role reversals can be stressful. It's important to discuss dystonia and the fact that one parent has dystonia, for example, with children, because children notice that there's something wrong and they have fertile imaginations. It's important to discuss what it is and what the implications for the family is with children as well. Avoid secrecy with friends and colleagues. Immediately after diagnosis, there may be a tendency to try to keep things secret. But you can't really expect other people to extend help to you if you haven't been honest with them and you haven't told them what dystonia is and what its implications for you are. So avoid secrecy and be open with people. Perhaps have set phrases or set statements that you've prepared for telling strangers even what dystonia is and how it affects you. Seek help from available sources. There are many sources of help available. Physiotherapists that we've just heard from and who can suggest exercises to reduce pain. Social workers who can talk to you about benefits available. Occupational therapists who can advise you on alternative ways of doing things so that dystonia is less of a problem. A psychologist or counselor that we, I think, heard from Erhard, the fact that psychotherapy can be helpful when you're having bad patches, having difficult periods, feeling a bit depressed or low. Home help can help with chores around the household. But again, don't assume that your GP or your neurologist will automatically refer you to any of these sources of help. As I said, communication with doctors is a two-way process, and you need to ask doctors for these referrals if you think you're going to benefit from them. Now, all of us advise to do this. Aim for mental and physical well-being, sleeping well, 7 to 8 hours, exercising 3 to 5 days a week for 20 minutes or so, eating a well-balanced diet, remaining curious, trying to learn new things. Social engagement is a very good way of keeping your mind active. So this advice, which is for the whole population, equally applicable to people with dystonia, aiming for mental and physical well-being. Now, living with disability can be financially demanding. It is important to engage in careful financial planning before a drop in income happens, because financial hardship in itself can be a challenge to live with, and it's important to prevent that happening when you start on your dystonia journey. Now, the challenges that you face with dystonia are not one-off. There are periods when you come to terms with your illness and you're sailing through smoothly, positively, and then there will be bad patches coming along. So this process of adaptation and adjustment to the illness needs to be continuous and ongoing, because the challenges that you face with dystonia are not one-off and either. There is evidence suggesting that being part of a community and also doing good makes you feel good. And one of the ways you could make yourself feel happier is by joining groups such as Dystonia Europe or your national dystonia group, so that you feel part of a community, that you can campaign for better service provision for dystonia. And these would be not only ways of achieving something for dystonia, but also making yourself feel better. So these were the so-called 23 commandments. I haven't told you anything magical. I've told you very commonsensical strategies. The important thing is that you remind yourself to use them on a daily basis. And as I said, if you go through them one by one, I can cite research evidence to support the effectiveness of each one of them, but I didn't think you needed the empirical evidence, research support, but ability to put this in use on a daily basis. Now, for those of you who may be interested, these are some online resources that you could use for mindfulness, for self-compassion, for happiness, and for therapy and self-management. Thank you very much for listening.